Hello, and again, welcome to Bit Depth. I'm Santiago Ramones. Across from me is
Sandeep Sharma.
I'm really excited to have you. I'm glad that you reached out, and whenever I set out the question of who wants to be on, I put a mental note of you, and then great, you reached out. So this is one of my favorite things of being able to get people that both listen to the podcast, but people that do a bunch of interesting things that I can be like, oh man, I'm glad that this person listens to the podcast because it's another great person to have on the podcast. So
Exactly. Yeah.
So of course, to start, who are you? What do you do?
My name is Sandeep, as I mentioned. I have an interesting background, so I'm not. I didn't start in music. I actually still work as a geophysicist at Devon Energy. So my background is more more scientific.
Yeah.
With music, I started probably 2.5 years back. And it started with, I have to give huge kudos to my wife. She took me to the Roots concert. And let me say that I loved music always. It's not that I all of a sudden was like, man, I really love music now. But it's the hip hop side of things started with, the Roots. I watched them live at the Windstar Casino about 2018. And there was a guy who was using a launch pad, their DJ. And I was like, what is that? And I didn't know that you can still technically make music without learning an instrument. And then so that's where my sort of fascination with music and especially hip hop came in. And so I am now producing for a lot of artists in town. I do predominantly hip hop music, but as you probably heard from the newest stuff I send you, it's just like a genre, kind of mixing things. And we'll talk about more of why I started experimenting with, kind of sounds later. But yeah, I'm just a producer in town. I also make films. I'm an upcoming, I guess, amateur filmmaker. And yeah, I mean, I also mix and master, and it's kind of interesting because of my background in geophysics. I do a lot of signal processing. So I had that sort of, physics-based approach to mixing and mastering sound, which helped immensely when I was mixing and mastering my music. It's like, oh, I know what frequencies are, I know what pitch is. So that kind of helped me. So I'm not going to say that I'm not glad the degrees that I did, but I wish I found music a lot earlier than I did.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess let's start with the geophysicist side. How did you get there? How did you start there? And why did you keep pursuing it?
Yeah. So I was born in India, and my whole family migrated to US in 2006. And I just finished high school when I was in India. And Indian education is a lot different, right? So it's very sort of focused on, it's kind of stereotypical, but sort of like engineers and doctors. It sort of has a lane that you go to. And I was never incredibly good at studies. Yeah. And so when I came here, I was sort of like really mesmerized by, you actually have choices when you go into universities, because in India, it's, you go to an engineering school and you have the curriculum set. That's it. That's what you do. And here, it's just like, wait a second, I can be undecided? That this is new. And that didn't work out well for me, because I actually just, screwed around quite a bit and just didn't have a direction in mind for where I wanted to go. And then my brother, who's a computer engineer, obviously stereotypical, my brother. So he introduced me to something called environmental sciences, because his friend was in environmental science. And within that, I found this course they were offering called geophysics. And I was like, this sounds interesting. I don't know what it is. I know it's something to do with earth physics. And so I might try it out. And the day one, it's just like the idea of sort of understanding what's underneath us without actually technically looking at it by just imaging, that fascinated me. It's just like, it's almost like, looking for the unknown kind of thing. And so I just got, absolutely hooked with geophysics. And then I did my undergrad and my first master's at Rutgers in New Jersey. And then I made my way to sort of work more towards the oil and gas geophysics in Oklahoma State University. So that's where I started as a PhD, soon kind of found out is like I actually want to make a little bit of money now because it's been a while since I've been in school. And so I finished my master's at OSU, and then I've been working at Devon Energy since 2016.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's kind of an interesting thing. One, I really relate to you on the like immigrant perspective of sort of the culture shock coming here. I didn't quite have as much of a culture shock as you did because I was very little when I came to the US. But it is an interesting thing. It's come up before that different countries that aren't maybe as like grossly wealthy as the US is, it is something that's come up in the past where I've had Nelson Gonzalez on, who is also from Venezuela, and they had a similar thing where like there was a lot of pressure to become an engineer and this sort of thing. I don't know what that is about like countries that are not as wealthy or something as America, that they sort of try and pressure people. It's like, hey, you gotta like do something to like make some money or like dig us out of this, whatever it is, you know, like, whereas in the US, there's a lot more like privilege and freedom of choice and stuff like that. I guess, what are your thoughts on that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Now that I go back to India, it's definitely changed quite a bit, but I mean, there's still that pressure of, having a good job, having a monthly salary kind of stuff. But I think the younger generation mindsets have changed a little bit, where you are allowed to experiment with what you want to do. As a whole, you still have a pretty big push towards education, which is absolutely fine. I mean, but it's just like where I differ from the Indian culture is when education is sort of forced upon you. Like if like up until high school, sure, that just do that. But after that, I do understand the point that, older generation have towards, hey, you got to make sure that you can provide for yourself and your family. But I think in today's age, there's also different avenues you can go to make, make some money. It doesn't have to be the usual engineers or doctors. And again, I respect all engineers and doctors, but I wish I found music a lot earlier. I don't think my mom would have been. She's still not happy about it, She's like, "Oh, don't you dare quit that job to do music."
Yeah.
But that's something that you have to just, I guess, experiment. Is like, what do you really love in life, and kind of go with that. And I think the thing that I would tell my Indian, if they're listening, is kind of, I think forcing kind of takes away from the fun of doing something. Like if somebody wants to be an engineer, by all means, if that's your choice. But I think it's so innately in us that I don't know, how can you tell if it's your choice or something that your parents have always told you? So that I'm not sure you can at some point separate. Me coming to US is what gave me that different perspective. I don't know if you're still in India, if I would think like that. I'm not sure yet. If I would ever find music, if I would ever have done anything differently. So I think that changed my perspective. So I'm not sure how you would do that with somebody who lives in India for their whole life. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I guess going into the like nitty gritties of geophysics, what's the new cool thing in your field that everyone's like, wow, this is uncharted territory and this is something new that's really groundbreaking for us?
Actually, it's kind of interesting because Lucas talked about this. It's AI. AI has like been the thing in every industry that is, and artificial intelligence is something that we use quite a lot of for analyzing our data. And that's what I mostly do is I do programming and I do data science with the data that we get. So that's probably the thing. And I think it's been, and then cloud computing, that's another big buzzword. But the problem is the amount of people that actually truly understand it is staggeringly small, but they have to use that buzzword every time, just because it makes you look good kind of thing. It's almost like, I think you in one of the podcasts mentioned, knowing the names of a certain, like musical term, but then actually using it might be completely different. You can spout out the names and this and that, but like when it comes to using something, that's completely different. And that sort of comes to play in almost any industries, that those buzzwords always keep coming in. And yep, so artificial intelligence is huge right now. We also have, if like the fiber optic cables that, so we use something like that to image fractures in the subsurface. That's another cool thing that has been going on for a few years, and that's something that I work on as well. But yeah, AI would be possibly the most interesting and the most like most you know like famous of things that have hit the oil and gas, and I think in general most of the world, like any industry, there's AI.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, even in music too, we're seeing it in like how can we master songs with an AI algorithm? How can we get a mix sounding good? How can we get noise reduction to use this AI algorithm type stuff? So yeah, it is in everything, and we're kind of seeing a different world now with what computers can do nowadays. So switching gears into film, how did you first get started in making films and what drew you towards it?
Yeah. So again, 2016 and 17 have been 2018 and 19, my bad, have been like the formative years of my creative side. So it's just like I speak of it as like I would just got born, but it is kind of a rebirth of my personality. So with films, at work, I have a colleague, Sean Bingham, who made a film. So he writes novels and he also makes films. And so I started, when I first joined the company, he just released his first film, and he was in the process of writing the script for his second one, which was going to be a zombie film. And so I started, just me wanting to, always been a movie buff, wanting to learn more about films and how to, actually make films. I started chatting with him, and then we started, developing the friendship. And then 2019 is when we filmed that zombie film. I was an actor in it. I also did the soundtrack for it, and I was just helping out. Like, it's a small crew, so you do multiple jobs. I was helping with lighting, I was helping with sound and all that stuff. But for some reason, even if we were at this filming location, we shot a lot in Guthrie, downtown, in Oklahoma City, Francis Tuttle, Langston. But just being on set, that that energy that people have, and even if you're there from like 10 in the morning to 6 the next morning, I never, I was never angry or annoyed with anything. It was just pure happiness, just like. And then it also made me appreciate films a lot more, saying that, hey, there's a scene where this guy comes into the room that takes like an hour and a half to film. It's just like, okay, the lighting is not good. I just don't like the angle. Yeah, why don't you change the color of this light? Make it warmer, make it brighter. It's just the things that go into it. I was immensely, just almost like stunned by the work that you have to do to make a film. And so Zombactor, that's the name of the film, is how I got hooked with films. And I was like, okay, I already found music, and making the music for the film, even more fun. And I was like, I need to somehow find a creative outlet for all the stories that I have, and I'm not a good writer, so novels was always out. And so I was like, how do I still have to write scripts, but it's like, how do you do this in the way where it's like where you can still share your stories, but I don't have to keep writing and writing. So film, the visual media was something that it was like a natural progression. It's like, okay, I'm going to start making films. And we have worked on a few things. And yeah, Zombactor was the biggest one. And we just have a lot of stuff in our vault right now, just slowly and steadily getting to it. With a full-time job, things get a little bit harder, and you have to find time to do what you love, but the paradox is you have to work to, pay towards the things you want to do. So it's just like a loop that comes. And so yeah, so that's how film started for me, and yeah, I've been hooked ever since.
Yeah. You've also been doing music videos as well. How is that different from just doing like film style work and then doing, filming people? I mean, I see that you work with a lot of rappers anyways. And so it's like, it's a different kind of perspective. So what is that like?
So I've sort of become a little bit like I've sort of understood that, hey, I don't want to do things like other people do. So there's a certain style of music videos that you see with rap. It's just it's a very, like, not always the same, but there's a certain formula for it. I wanted to change that. I do have I have working on a few music videos right that are coming up. I see music video as a short film because a music piece is a story. Depending, you can also have music video where it's repeat one word 17 times. But I'm just saying, in general, good music has story. Even instrumentals have a story associated with it. And so I am trying to approach music videos as films now. So as something that has a beginning, middle, and an end. It doesn't have to be like that all the time, but I'm trying to make the music video side of things a little bit more cinematic. And so I think I have to sort of establish that standard for myself, just because I'm at that point in life that I probably don't want to do things that I don't really enjoy, just because, I've already wasted so much time with geophysics. Not wasted, but I've already spent so much time doing things that I do enjoy, but doesn't give me as much fun or as much happiness as music and movies do. So I'm at that point where I'm just going to establish a certain style that I have. And that's what I'm doing with music as well. And then, if people, sort of vibe with it, then, we work together. But, I'm approaching music videos almost as short films. So that a long-winded answer to that question is, I think I'm just combining those two visual media together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then, of course, jumping into the more fun part, the music.
Yes.
What was your first like foray into, like, yeah, you talked about that Roots concert that really made you go like, man, I don't have to go learn an instrument to be able to do this musical thing. So what was the first thing that you jumped into like, I'm making music now?
Yeah, it's actually a funny story, and let me start by saying that I would love to. I mean, that's what I've been doing, is actually learning instruments, but it's just that, again, the time factor comes into play. Should I, like, if I have more time, I would learn instruments and also still produce, like, chopping up loops. But at this point, with the time I have to use it very wisely. It's like, okay, I could play the drums for an hour, or I could make like a couple of beats and, like work with a few rappers to kind of get that into a song. So that being said, the funniest thing was, so I actually bought there was like the Novation launch key, that little, I bought it at the concert during the break on Amazon. And my wife was like, oh my God, here we go. Here's another, because I've always been a person that has a lot of interest. Like, I want to do this. I want to do off-road motorcycling, and I still do adventure biking and this and that. So she thought that this is 4 months and it's going to be gone. I bought the launch keys. I remember we lived at the, it's funny though, we lived at the Edge Midtown Apartments, and now my studio is right opposite to it. So it kind of started there, and it's sort of now still around that same area. So I brought the keypad out, right? I have Ableton Light, and I was like, man, I'm going to make my first beat. I was so proud. I put some keys in, put some drums with the drum pad, and I had my headphones on, and I called my wife, which she was my girlfriend back then. And I was like, hey, listen to this beat that I made, super proud. And because I didn't know what, good music was back then. Like, I was like, oh, I'm making something. And she, as soon as she listened, she started laughing. Like, and then she saw me. It's like, oh my God, it's bad. And she wanted to say something positive about it. And she said, hey, I like the ticking sound. And I was like, that's the metronome playing. And so from there, it did get like when I started, it was harder for me to like I always had the ear for sound and keys and notes. I can, like I knew when a certain notes were out of key. And I'm not as good enough to actually use that to my advantage, because you can play certain things that are out of key but still sound. So I'm not there yet, but I always was good at finding the right key for something. So I kept going. I started sampling a little bit more. I started looking at Indian music. I started sampling Indian music for just for practice, because I can't really distribute them for copyright issues. And so I don't know what happened. So something happened probably the beginning of 2020 that it's almost like I went into a different phase of music. So I started sampling better. And, it just came with practice, just kind of understanding how to sample, watching a lot of YouTube videos, listening to a lot of different types of music helped quite a bit too. And and the journey into actually working with producers is even more interesting, in which we just bought a house at Overholser. This is 2019 December, and the next year 2020, we were just walking at the lake. I saw this graffiti, like chalk graffiti on the walkway, saying that, hey, check out Rob Kumpion. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I kept walking, and there was another one. Hey, check out Rob Kumpion's YouTube channel. And so I was like, okay, I'll check it out, because I'm one of those people who's very curious. It's like, I want to see what this is, just because. And that was a good marketing technique too on his part. So he was an artist in town. He was a rapper, and I saw his stuff, and I was like, okay, he's pretty dope. And so I just reached out to him. He's like, hey, on YouTube comments, he's like, hey, do you want to work together? And here's my Instagram, add me. And he added me. And then we just started making music. I started producing for him. And I did the first album called Fables and Fictions with him. And then, and then I started getting better and better, just because working with an artist gives you another dimension to your music. Because sometimes what I think is good does not mean that other people will think is good. So I found that, hey, what I think might be absolute crap, other people might actually really like it. And that has happened to me countless times, where I was like, that's my least favorite beat. And the artist is like, yeah, I want that one. And so with him, I started this musical journey. And then I started just reaching out to people in town. It's like, hey, and the biggest person that I work with, a huge shout out to Thomas Hu. Thomas Hu is one of the dopest rapper in Oklahoma City. And so with him, I just reached out to him and said that, hey, I love your music. I listen to all of his stuff. It's like, I really love your music, and here's the beat pack. See if you like it. He didn't like it. And I have a very less ego, like very small ego when it comes to stuff like that. You can tell me you don't like my music, and I'm not going to be like, you know what, screw you, I'm not going to work with you anymore. I said, hey, show me something, and I send him another one. And 3 weeks later, he's still not liking any of the songs that I made. And so then I said, hey, why don't you send me something that you do, like, and the way because I was listening to his old stuff and doing this, and he had the idea for a new sound. And so I wasn't getting there. And so he uploaded a video on Instagram with him rapping on a beat. And I was like, okay, it's kind of like that lo-fi hip hop. And then I started making stuff for him. And then he's like, all right, give me your number. And so he called me. He's like, yeah, I had to like write on this right now. And then he invited me to one of his studio sessions. And since then, that was probably like June, July, something like that. And the first person that showed up, this was absolutely crazy, was JB, like at the studio session. So I like the first beat I ever made for him, JB was featuring on that beat. And I was just like, somebody slap me, because I don't think this is real. Yeah. And so with him, I have been working predominantly with him. And the music journey started from Rob and then moved into other artists. And for me, I don't mind like reaching out to people. It's like, hey, I have this sound. Do you want to work with me? I'm doing it less now, just because I want to make sure that the artists that I work with have my attention, and all the time that I can give him. And so, yeah, I mean, long-winded answer to that. That's how it's very weird the way my journey started. It's almost like just bunch of coincidences. Just I was at the Root concert. Okay, we bought a house near Overholser, and there was a graffiti on the walkway, and then I just checked out somebody's YouTube and reached out to him, and then that's how it just the ball just kept rolling, and then gaining more momentum. And so right now he is crazy, man. He writes 3 songs a night. Like every Thursday, he writes 3 songs, and he's doing what's called 52 and 52. So he's dropping one single every Tuesday for the rest of the year. And I'm sort of the executive producer on that whole project, and I think we have done almost 40 songs already in last 4 months for it. And then we just keep going. And then I started reaching out to more people. And so music has been preoccupying a lot of my free time, and my wife is okay with it, but I think I need to give more time to her.
Yeah, that's the downside of having very time-consuming hobbies and passions, and then it takes up everything. But I mean, you can really see how the work that you put in and just reaching out is, helps make a lot of awesome progress. Something that you've been saying over time is a question that I really like asking musicians is there such a thing as bad music, and how do you describe that?
Man, I heard a lot of people answer that question on your podcast, and I thought I would have an answer by now, but I think it's very subjective, because just if I don't like something, and it's even comes down to my production. Like sometimes I think not bad music, but sometimes I think I don't like this beat. But the artist is like, hey, I love that beat. So why don't that's the one to work on first. And I was like, so that gave me a different perspective. It was like, hey, yes, I have a certain style, which I'm trying to still figure out and experiment with. I would love everything in that style, and I shouldn't be quick enough to be like, hey, that other music is bad just because I don't like it. So it's almost like a way to now find myself and lower that. Just like I said with the movies, I used to make fun of movies. It's like, man, that movie's so bad, but some of them are truly genuinely bad. Like movies, I'll tell you, there's some really genuinely bad films, but I have taken that sort of positive approach to things. It's like, okay, let me find something positive about that film. There's something. So I think that in my head, okay, yeah, that's bad music. But I think I have to analyze a little bit more. It's like, why do I think it's bad? Why do I think it doesn't work? Maybe it doesn't work for me, but it might work for somebody else. So I would say there might be, but I'm trying to take a positive approach to it and be like, there's probably something nice about it. I'm not sure. So a very, very roundabout way of saying that, yeah, I'm not sure.
And that's okay too. Do you separate art from the artist?
I would like to, but sometimes it's hard. And it's easier when it comes to films, I think, because they're playing a character that's different from them. And I think when you're doing music, you still are that person. Yes, you're doing the music, but just like I think me and my wife are actually talking about this is, like probably I'm not going to name names, but there are bigger artists that have some allegations towards them. Do you still listen to their music? And that's a hard one, just because she still does and I still do as well. But yeah, that's a hard one to answer. And I would say it really depends. I think it also probably depends on the intensity of stuff that they have done that could be wrong in my head, and so it's very perspective driven. Should I separate the art from the artist? Yeah, I don't. That one's a hard one. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say too much. Just people start be like, wow. No, I don't like this. I don't like this artist. I don't listen to his music anymore.
But you're not the one who's the bad person whose music you shouldn't listen to. So
Yeah.
it depends.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for people that are just starting out in music or in film? I mean, you're just starting out and stuff, but like you're getting going. So what would you say to someone who is kind of in your shoes a year or 2 years ago?
Yeah, I would say, like, first advice would be to just do it. Like, just start experimenting with your own style. What I've realized since last few months is, um, be confident in what you do, and confidence comes from experience, also. But don't, like, it's almost like if you're insecure in what you do, and when you first start you're very insecure in what you do, you will see that people will take advantage of you, because they realize that you're insecure in what you do. And so when you start out, have a little bit of confidence. I know it's hard to have just start having confidence, but experiment with things. Have a little bit of, kind of trust in yourself. Like, hey, I can do this, because you can always tell. It's like, hey, I have something that if I just focus on that, I can do it. And then, don't listen to people that are not negative, but don't listen to people that sort of steer you away from, what you want to do. Because I've noticed that I've reached out to people. As a new person, you're very excited for what you do, and like, you want to reach out to people, you want to work with them, you want to do this, you want to do that. But sometimes those people either will completely ignore you, or they won't reach out to you, or you won't give any positive feedback from it. That bothered me when I first started. And just like, hey, I'm just trying to learn. But you have to also look at from their perspective. I'm just a new guy. They don't know who I am, so they shouldn't be, they shouldn't have to respond to me. And so, like, as a new artist, for me, I would always respond to people, just because my personality is like that. I will not, no matter who you are, I will respond to you, say, hey, I'm sorry, I won't be able to work with you right now, kind of thing. But as a newer artist, you will get a lot of rejection. You will get a lot of just people ignoring you. Yeah, don't let that bother you as much. It is hard when you're in that position, but you will get bothered by it. You will be like, hey, I'm just trying to learn. I don't know why people are just ignoring me. Just find your own sound. And that's what I've been trying to do since last, almost a year, is just find your own sound. And as I tell people, it's kind of a joke. It's like, bro, cult leaders had followers. So when you make something, you will find followers. Like, there's somebody, like, there's a fan base for every music there's out there. And that's also sort of a roundabout way of saying that, is there bad music? Because, you could have followers for bad music too, and for what we think bad. So yeah, keep doing what you do. Don't get disheartened by any rejection, or, and because if you're passionate enough, you should keep doing what you do, just because they can ignore you, but they cannot really take your talent. So just keep finessing that talent, keep working hard, and just be happy, man, with what you do. Because if you really love to do, if you're going far enough to reaching out to people and starting something that's sort of in the arts and visual media, like visual media and audio, then you are passionate about it. I mean, I can say there are probably producers that just want to capitalize on this whole trend of trap music, but if you are getting into it, you have a passion for it. So you need to make sure that the thing that you do with so much passion, you need to be happy with it. So just keep doing what you're doing, just do it would be the biggest one. Just don't think about it. I've seen people, and I'll tell you one more thing. So I've seen, there's a producer that I met in one of the film sets, and he gave me a brilliant advice. It's just like, let's say there are 100 people that want to do films or music. Off that 100, 98 people will just keep talking about it. It's like, yeah, man, once I get good at it, I'll reach out. And there's 2 people who will invest in themselves, who will go out, seek out other artists, who will work hard. So be that 2 people, because if you invest in yourself, you will have some return later down life. And I've seen the 98% of people as well who just talk about it. And it's like, man, once I in the next year, man, I'm going to make this film. I'm going to do this, do that. And then nothing happens. I would say even if it's crappy, like the first thing you ever made, just like I did, and my wife laughed at it, just keep going. Just, there's the people that you listen to were not made overnight, even though they might have gained popularity overnight, but it was that overnight was 13 years long. It just like that's what, so it just keep going.
Yeah, definitely. Switching gears into the tough questions that make bit depth. What is the role of spirituality or religion in your life?
So I'm not religious at all. And spirituality is, I do, like, I'm not spiritual either. But I do like to read mythology and or religious texts to gain that sort of philosophical approach towards life. So I see all these religious texts as just a bunch of stories with a lot of philosophy of human behavior, and especially if you look at Hinduism, there's a lot of different interesting stories that are, revolves around greed, lust, hate, anger, happiness. And so as a filmmaker and somebody who wants to tell stories, I am fascinated by the human behavior, how humans interact with each other, how, like, how they approach a certain scenario, and I get a lot of that interesting ideas from the religious texts and just books and like religious books in general that have sort of that stories about human interaction. So it's I'm not religious, but I do love reading religious texts to get that perspective.
Yeah. Was that ever something that was, I guess, instilled in you by growing up in India, there's a variety of different like beliefs going on. And then same here in the US, there's a variety of different beliefs. How has that sort of, that influence of different religions and different perspectives shaped where your spiritual or lack of spiritual views are?
Yeah. So I was a little bit religious when I was back in India. And that sort of always comes down to, it kind of everything is sort of connected, right? So you have the idea of engineer and doctors. It's instilled by the culture that you live in. Same thing happens with religion. It's sort of instilled by where you're born. Who your parents are religious, you tend to be religious, but just because that's what you've been taught. And so I was a little bit religious when I was younger, but almost like to a point where I was just like begging for good grades. That's basically was my extent of religion. And I used to go to, because my grandpa and my grandma were religious, and they used to read the Ramayana, which is one of our bigger books. And so they used to read, my grandpa used to read my grandma that book almost like every Sunday. And so that's when I started sort of liking the characters and the complexity of those characters from that book. And so when I came here, the religions like just completely left my body. It's just like, because I got, first of all, going into a scientific field, you start having the logical reasoning and the scientific approach to everything. And, it can make your mind a little bit sterile with all that, everything is calculated, but that's just how I like to view things, is, how in a very logical and scientific, method. It might not be true for everybody, but that's how I look at it. So when I came to the US and started going into the sciences, that a little bit of religious belief just completely was gone at that point. And then once that is gone, it's kind of interesting. When that is gone, then you start looking at the text that they taught you as religion, a lot more interesting book as philosophy, like, if that makes sense. You start reading it with a different perspective, not to please anybody, not to do anything, but just to understand the stories that it's telling you and the characters that it's telling you, and how you can take philosophical lessons out of those characters. So yeah, once I came to the US, I blamed the US for making me, almost atheist.
Yeah. Then thank you for giving me the transition into the next question, because you said almost atheist. What is your definition of God?
I don't have one. I feel like for the longest time, and I still believe that my parents are my gods. Just because if you think about it, they are the one, like everything you can talk about God in a way other than you can say about your parents. Plus, you can actually feel and see them. It's just that's how I feel about it. And so, like not everybody has the same relationship with their parents, but for me, I think my definition of God would be, what they are, which is, a nurturing parents that have given me more than I asked for. And that's, like that, even in India, I was very privileged in that sense where they provided me with things that they didn't have when they were growing up. So, yeah, for me, I'm an atheist, but my parents would be my gods.
Cool. I don't think I've heard that answer before. That's really interesting. What is free will, and do you believe in it? Question mark.
Yeah, that I even that question I thought of it, but I couldn't. I was just like, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna go wing it when he asked me that question. If he doesn't, it is, man. That one always gets me. Even when I was listening to other people's podcasts, I think there is free will. Uh, it also might be based on where you are in this world. That free, like the definition of free will. Because as humans, you should have free will, but does the society allow you to have free will is the other question, I guess. And yeah, for the question that should we have it, probably, yeah. I mean, it. Then you're charting into territories is like, what do people do with that free will? That's the question that you have to ask next. But I think at a larger scale, I think it's a good thing, and you should have free will.
Cool.
And if that's, I don't know, that might be the worst answer I've given, or probably anybody's given on your podcast. But
everyone has different perspectives, and not everyone thinks about that one all the time. And so I acknowledge that one's super hard.
yes,
What do you think happens when we die?
I think the same. You become worm food, man. For us, we get cremated, so we become ashes. But it's almost like I forgot who mentioned that, but somebody mentioned on your podcast. So you just, whatever happens before you're born, it's just nothingness. That's basically it. So I don't really think about that quite a bit, just because I have so much to do before I get to that phase where I'm just exactly the same as I was before I was born, with just nothing. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I think spending so much time trying to think about what happens after you die, it just takes away from you living when you actually are alive. So for me, it's just, yeah, whatever happens, it's all cool.
Yeah.
I don't want to live for eternity, though. That's way too long.
Yeah. Stuff gets old after a while.
Yes.
How do you determine what good behavior is?
See, now that I was ready for the question, but the reason I was ready just because I've been thinking about that so much. And as I mentioned, with the religious text and the filmmaker side of me wants to understand, just human behavior and human psychology. And so I have come to a point where even if there's a negative character in any film, I love if there is a reason for them to be negative. I want to understand what circumstances were presented to this individual that he ended up being what he is. Now, I'm not sure if it's something such a thing as, like true evil that does, no matter what circumstances it's being presented, it will become that. But I think for most people, circumstantial, your circumstances that you're born, circumstances, or, who you grew up with, what were you subjected to, really should explain a majority of bad behavior. I think as a society we should understand the root cause of that bad behavior. I mean, yes, at first sight you'll be like, okay, that's bad behavior, let's punish it, kind of thing. But I think we need to dig deeper into what makes a person do certain things. And so I do think there's bad behavior. I just would like to understand the background and what happened to that person to come to that point.
Yeah, exactly. How do we reduce the division between people?
Man, everybody should love good music. That's one. But yeah, that one is very interesting too, just because, and I think that the previous question should go into it, just because a lot of that division does come from your background, who you grew up with, the way you look at certain people, the way, just like racism, the way you approach racism. Yes, you can. That's the thing. You got to understand where they're coming from. Yes, the behavior itself is extremely bad, and you need to take that into account. But also, how do we stop that from happening? I think to understanding people at a very basic level, at a very deeper level, also will result in us not being divided as much. Just because, again, if I was in India, and there, because India is pretty bad within racism between Muslims and Hindus, so that's been discussed quite a bit. And then the thing is, I think a lot of my school friends are that now, and I was like, wait a second, you have educations, you're engineers, you're doctors, so education doesn't really change your mindset. I don't think that's what it is, because education doesn't teach you morality or ethics or anything like that. It just, if you're an engineer, you're just reading about, slopes and tangents and sines and cosines, and you get very sterile with your thought process. And then people around you start, talking about, oh, this person, this community is bad, that community is bad. And you stop questioning that, and you start believing, if there's 17 people around you telling you something, then you just almost as human start believing what they're saying, because it is easier to just accept things and it's harder to actually revolt against it for a lot of people. So I think to understand behavior and to understand how are we divided, we should probably go back to looking at the surroundings that these people are actually living for their during their formative years, because that's when you start sort of injecting a lot of like parents start injecting a lot of their insecurities, people start injecting a lot of insecurities into kids. And if that's all, if that's how you're born, in a very small place with people just telling you what they believe is true, then you're just gonna basically be like what's the word just like like you're gonna do exactly the same as what they're doing. But and that's what changed for me, is traveling and having a different perspective and having an understanding that, hey, there has to be a certain difference between us for us to think differently. Let's figure out what that difference is, and then maybe we can come to a common point. And so, yeah, I think to be less divided, we should probably understand where everybody's coming from and understand, why they behave a certain way.
Definitely. I guess you've probably already answered this question through all these other answers, but I still like asking it. Do you believe humans are evil by nature?
I'm probably not, I'll probably bring up Hitler. I don't. Yes, like if you at the face of it, fuck yes, he's evil. But again, like for majority of the people, you have to again understand where they're coming from. It could be like, I was watching that show Mindhunter on Netflix, and I love that show because I love David Fincher. And it just the idea, it's just like two detectives going around interviewing serial killers to understand why they do certain things. And the majority of them, and these are based on real serial killers, majority of them, it's just like childhood trauma, abusive parents. It's just like a lot of trauma that kind of makes you almost crazy. So evil, when you see it, you'll be like, okay, that's evil. And for my scientific mind, I would probably start going back to their childhood and see what's wrong. And that's what they were doing in the show, where they were understanding if there is a certain behavior that leads you to become a serial killer and can be identified before it even happens. So I guess I'm sure there are truly evil person in the world just looking at history. But even then, understand the I guess just for curiosity, how did they come to the point that they were? Would be an interesting thought process, to see what made them, just completely snap, kind of thing, to become that evil. There has to be a reason.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think humanity is heading towards in the future?
Man, a lot of AI going on, man. I don't know if I like it, but I mean, I'm not I'm not too sure, just because it's kind of interesting. You have all this AI stuff, but then all the retro stuff is coming back. It's just like, it's just very confusing for me of what, but as a whole, I'm hoping humanity is heading towards more let live and let live sort of thing. I'm hoping, just because of what I've seen in last few years, is people's individuality has been coming out quite a bit. So, people are free to do whatever they want, dress however they like, or, be what they are. So I'm hoping if that's where humanity's heading, apart from, we won't talk about wars and country disputes and all that stuff, but I'm saying as humanity, if we are all sort of just understand each other and just be who we are, I think it's a positive outcome in the future. I mean, right now it's seeming very, very negative at this point in time in society with all that's going on. But I'm hoping once this craziness is over and, you have this younger generation that comes up that have really interesting thought process, very, very, I'm just going to be who I am sort of mentality. And I think if those are the people, then, being parents and giving that ideas to kids, like, hey, you can be whatever you want. Just don't be an asshole. That's basically it. I think the future would look good. Or we'll just destroy ourselves with the climate change and we're all fucked. But on the positive side, if we can curb all of that, then I think we are headed towards something that's a lot more inclusive of, everybody and all cultures.
Yeah, definitely. What are you optimistic about for our future?
Music, that's probably one of the ones, and probably anything to do with, like, this is probably a very small scale answer, but if you've seen Mandalorian, that whole 3D virtual reality sets, man, I'm freaking excited for that one.
Yeah.
I want to get my hands on that one to make some films. But I mean, as human being, I guess, in a very broader sense, I'm excited about, again, how people's individuality and their I'll be what I want to be, how does that shape society, would be something that I'm optimistic about. And how does that affect music and films? Let's see how crazy people be with films and music, how experimental can we get with that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What makes you content?
Man, such a cliche answer, but probably just hanging out with my wife. I think if I had to choose between things, I'll probably always choose her, just because I think she has been a huge pillar in my life for all the creative stuff that I do. But just being with her, traveling with her, I think that's probably when I'm the most content. It's just hanging out with another human being that actually understands you at a deeper level. Like we just click so well that it's just like, just two friends hanging out all the time. So that, yeah, traveling with her, the most content I can ever be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. When will you be satisfied?
That, yeah, I'm I'm going into that thought process quite a bit these days. Like I'm one of those people who's probably not satisfied with where I am right now. Like I always want something more, you know. Oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. But I think recently my wife had a pretty major surgery, and she's doing great now, but she's recovering. But that was a scare that time that almost changed my perspective of what satisfaction is. It's kind of an interesting, like last 3 weeks have been absolutely freaking crazy, and you know just the way like so that I'll go into that music that I sent you, Galactic Revival, and I'll plug my stuff in. Don't worry about it. But but that beat tape was completely made in a hospital room in 2 days, and so that satisfied me in that sense. So the whole satisfaction definition in my head changed quite a bit. You know, before, like I'm still like you can't change a person overnight, but I had, you know, as I said, I was always like, hey, what's next? I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this. So I was never satisfied. But temporary satisfaction I've been sort of playing with a lot is like, hey, I'm satisfied with the music I have. I'm satisfied with where I am right now in life. And her surgery changed that quite a bit just because I sort of thought of the entire our life in perspective is like, hey, I can't be in this mindset of, you know, just keep going, keep going, keep going all the time. I have to be satisfied with where I am right now, satisfied with what I do, satisfied with my skill set. So yeah, her like satisfaction definition has changed quite a bit in my head, and I'm in the short term I'm pretty satisfied, but I do have like broader things I want to do. You know, like but I'm not gonna beat my head against the wall to get there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. What advice do you have for people in general?
Stop being assholes. Just be nice. And again, just try to talk to people, try to understand where they're coming from. And I've been guilty of this. I've been guilty of, you know, like I'm not a, you know, all pure hearted. I've been guilty of misidentifying people, guilty of, you know, looking at them a certain way. But what I've been trying to do more is just to understand their perspective, understand where they're coming from, and just talk to people, man. And it's just easier now to talk to people around the world. So just understand. Travel also. Travel opens up your mind. A lot of times you are so stuck in one circle, a certain amount of people, small little town. I mean, yeah, you can't do much about being born in a certain town, but you can make the conscious effort of actually traveling, opening up your mind to different cultures, different people. And, you know, just when you do that, you sort of become a lot more, lot more open. You know, you just accept people more at that point, just because you've seen all this culture. You've seen how people live in India, in Nepal, Venezuela. Just travel and be nice, people. Come on.
Yeah. Last question, potentially most importantly, cake or pie?
Man, I like both. My wife has been making a lot of cakes, so I would say cake for now. But if it's sugar, I'm fine with anything, man.
Maybe she'll start getting into pies, which pies are more difficult to make anyways. But
Yes.
like, if your wife starts making more pies, it's like, oh man, maybe you'll like those better. So we'll see. But right now it's cake. What is best cake?
Oh, I don't. And that's more of a nostalgic. Black Forest. I love Black Forest cake. Just because that was one of my favorite cakes when I was a kid, and it's still one of the best cakes. And my second best would be red velvet.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
Awesome. Sandeep, thank you so much for doing this with me. Where can we find you and your things?
Yep. So my Instagram is Sundeep, is SUNDEEP _productions. That's the same thing on Facebook. I have a website, sundeep-productions.com. And on Spotify and every streaming channel, I am under Sundeep, but there's a difference. There's a space between sun and deep, just because somebody already took the word Sandeep as one. So yeah, you can just search me on any of those. If you go to Instagram, there's a link tree with all my stuff on there, all my artist profiles, and YouTube. On YouTube, I'm also Sandeep Productions. So yeah.
Awesome. How convenient is it that like, well, first of all, like Sandeep is your real name. And so like, what does that mean? And then it just seems convenient that like in English, it's like two actual words.
Yes. So technically, if I was spelling it as in Hindi, it would be just like how Hindi is spoken. If Hindi was translated into how you write in English, it would be SAN, just because SA has the sound sa. So it's Sandeep would be that. So a lot of people actually call me Sundeep in India. But my mom wanted to spell me Sandeep because sun obviously is the sun, gives light, and deep is it's actually, cause from Hindi it would be deep with the softer D instead of deep. I know a lot of people, like my wife, cannot tell the difference. It's like, you just said the same two words.
Yeah, just now I just heard the same.
Yeah,
consonant.
exactly. Yeah, so it's like deep instead of deep. Like it's just like a small little in the front.
Sure.
So that means a lantern that we burn one of our festivals, which also gives light. So I guess it's light and light. So that's
Cool.
what my name means.
That's awesome. But yeah, no, I just think it's super cool that like your artist name can also just be your name and it still sounds really cool.
Exactly. Yeah. I lucked out on that.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm Santiago Ramones.
Sandeep, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
And now this is Galactic Revival from Sandeep's Communication Board, which is streaming everywhere now.
You can find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. I make music. I have an EP, a short album, that will be releasing on May 28th. It's 6 instrumental electronic tracks that didn't quite fit into a major release. It's called Sound Bites, and it'll be the first of many EPs that include stray songs, pieces, or recordings. Be on the lookout for that, and follow me on Instagram to stay up to date with all the stuff that I'm doing, both at bit.depth and at Santiago Ramones Music. If you like the podcast, leave comments on social media, leave reviews saying how much you like the podcast, and tell your friends about it. I really couldn't be doing this without you, and I'm super grateful to continue doing Bit Depth for this long. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting Bit Depth. I always end the podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Love never fails. It's going to be okay. I might be wrong.